never been done before.
We the people tell the government what to do. It doesn't tell us. We the people are the driver. The government is the car. And we decide where it should go and by what route to do. We the people are free. And I hope we have once again reminded people that man is not free unless government is limited.
Hello, beautiful people. How are you this very fine evening? I better take down the plea for help. And there we go. How are you? Having a good one? I'm hoping the connection's going to be a bit better tonight, but I've got to tell you, it's a bit rusty all round. I've just spent the last half an hour trying to get my Starlink working, and it's not working, which is a bit weird for some reason. I'm on a different Starlink, although that's what I was on last night. Right now I'm on something else. So it still says that I've got a pretty shaky sort of a connection. So please rest assured, if it all gets a bit too blocky and all that, I will upload the show, if you like, but I'll certainly upload the interview with SG Anon separately onto the YouTube and Rumble channels later today if this all starts to break down while we're watching it. My apologies. There's not much I can do. I haven't changed location at all, so I can only put it down to some sunspot activity that is predicted for this week, and maybe it's already happened and started to hit us, because a lot of people are complaining of internet problems at the moment, whether it be through the terrestrial network or through Starlink, which seems a bit weird. We've had cloud cover here all day due to the spraying, of course, yesterday and into the night. So it's been an overcast, dimming day today. Have you ever wondered about the stupidity of the governments who the right hand funnels money into these organizations that are actively trying to dim the sunlight coming through our atmosphere, while the other hand is handing out solar panel rebates and all sorts of incentives to go wind, go solar? Well, how does dimming and solar power work to our advantage in any way, shape or form? So I've yet to find anybody on the side of these monstrosities of wind turbines and solar fields who can explain that to me. Just not going to work. And if a volcano goes off, forget the airplanes playing, if a volcano goes off and fills our atmosphere full of volcanic ash, the same effect for years. So I wonder how we'd be worried about our crypto in those days. What's going to happen then? Anyway, a bit of fun. I want to kick off tonight by wishing one of our most wonderful supporters, Sunflower, a very happy birthday. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Sunflower. Happy birthday to you. There you go. I would do the hip hips, so I'll do the hip hip. You all do the hooray. Hip hip. I didn't hear you. Hip hip. Close. I think another go. Hip hip. See, I know you did it. Anyway, thank you very much for all you do for us, Sunflower, both in the chat and for me personally. It's wonderful to have a friend like you, and I feel quite blessed to have you and Rick in my life. So thank you very much. I think there might be somebody else celebrating a birthday, but I missed whom. So take my happy birthday song to whoever else is having a birthday in the chat today. I think we've got a few names that I'm not aware of in the chat today, and I'm not at all surprised. Last night's show seems to have created a few issues for some people, and so it bloody well should. Now, I also noticed that last night, because it was very jumpy, a lot of people didn't yep, righto, it's moving. A lot of people didn't hear exactly what I was talking about. So I'll précis it very quickly. Tim Dwyer has been working in conjunction with a number of other people around the nation who have a lot of credentials when it comes to constitutions and constitutional law, and how our constitution is very different today compared to what it was when our forefathers handed it down, or not so much the forefathers, but the Poms. So this is the crux of our problem, and we were trying to find a solution. Now, to that end, Tim invited all the best minds in the country to it, including the Commonwealth custodians, and another guy who I don't know if he just represents himself, I think, Ken Bartel. And two different things happened. There was an email exchange between Ken and someone else, and then there was a whole different shebang that went on with the custodians. Now, I noticed that there has been some comments put up in the video of yesterday, very negative comments, people calling me a splitter and I'm the cause of the division. And no. Shut up. We know who you are. Don't hide behind your pathetic little name and then laugh about the fact that your little group knows who wrote that because you've got all these sweet little names. We know. All right? So your little bleatings do not have any impact. Trolls are trolls are troll. And it doesn't matter if it's a custodian troll or just plain average run-of-the-mill Cooker Watch troll. It's a troll. Now, I understand you might want to go into bat for your little organisation, particularly if you're high up in it and making money out of it. Why wouldn't you? Because that's clearly what it's all about. Having had a little bit of a look through the site, you pay for everything. I'm not surprised. But anyway, what I was particularly pissed about was the fact that these people were invited as honoured experts and would have been and were definitely in the whole mix to try and help find us all a solution. Now, they come with what they come with. Obviously, the custodians come with a great deal of knowledge, so too did Ken. But they didn't come willingly to offer that knowledge. They came to steal audience. They came to generate a revenue funnel for their own businesses. Now, that's not in the spirit of what Tim was putting together. Not in any way, shape or form. Now, for those of you who say regarding emails, and I've chosen not to put them out. I've chosen to put them out because Tim and I have talked about it, and it would simply be too damaging. But keep it up, dickhead. Keep it up. If you doubt at all what I say, then we will release everything. And for those of you who wonder what that might do, I suggest you go back to your almighty leader, sitting at the bottom of that funnel of money, and ask him, if we released all the details that we claim we have, would he be embarrassed in any way? Would we be shown to be wrong, or would the Commonwealth custodians be shown in a very different light? So please keep your squeaking to yourself. Go and fix your cottage, because at the moment you are of no use to the bowel movement that once used to be the freedom movement until you people got involved and decided to farm it. Because that's what you did. And you don't apologize for it. You went into the whole process with that in mind, not with being a contributing partner in this. Well, a limited contributing partner, maybe. You'd limit the information you gave because you wanted to funnel the people in that organisation to yours for $15 a month, for $144 a year. Or $84, I think it is, for 6 months. Then, of course, you've got your document in there that you'd love people to come and sign, get as many people as possible to sign that one. That's $90 to sign their document, folks. If you get inside and want to go and sign their document, they'll sting you $90 to put your John Hancock on a bit of paper to help we the people. So keep it up, folks. I don't give a shit for trolls. Come to me with some facts and we can talk about it. If you tell me I'm wrong and explain to me how I am, then I will apologize. But right now, to accuse me of being the splitter, to accuse me of being the divisive one in all of this, is just bullshit and distraction from Commonwealth custodians hiding behind pretend names. Weak, gutless. All I'm doing is holding a mirror to your actions. A mirror to the words you said when you joined Tim's very merry little band of constitutional warriors. That's all I'm doing. I'm just holding a mirror to your actions. And if you would like, I'll hold the mirror up to your words, because we have them fully in print as well. There is a way out, but I'm not sure that you people are able to think of it. But there is a way out from what you are currently experiencing, which must be uncomfortable, I admit. And I'm not doing it because I have any pleasure in doing it. None at all. In fact, it makes me sick to have to do this. But if I don't point out the people in the freedom movement who do this because, it'd be divisive or, bullshit, they'll just keep on doing it. They'll just keep milking us, keep jumping on the next bandwagon and trying to put their name at the top of it, all while extracting the odd dollar or two on the way past. I'm disappointed for Jackie Dundee and her document. I'm disappointed in her decision to release it the way it was, and we've discussed all that. I'm also pretty... Well, look, Jody Lowe is still talking about doing this Canberra to Cairns run. I thought after we'd had a bit of a chat, he might have had a rethink, but that doesn't appear to be the case. And it appears that he's latched on to this document that Jackie has put forward and is now using that as his shield down the coast. I believe that Hoodie came out and wrote an email to all of the Hoodie supporters saying that he wasn't supporting it in any fashion. I believe a couple of others have come out and said they're not supporting it in any fashion. I can tell you now I won't be supporting it in any fashion whatsoever either. I think it's a phenomenal waste of time and dangerous to add your name to that list. Jackie's document, I think, is great, but I think the whole idea of getting it to Canberra has been poorly thought out. It's been thought out quickly, rushed to try and be at the head of the pack. And I think Jodie's probably the one who's done that. I don't know for sure, but the impetus had to come from far north Queensland somewhere to do it. And look, all power to him for wanting to do something. I'm not trying to tear the guy down. But this probably isn't the something I'd be swinging my hat on. That's all I'm saying. It's up to you, of course, Jody. You do what you like. But I'm not going to put you on here to promote it, and because I really don't give airtime to things I don't promote or I don't support. And talking with a lot of people over the last few days in the interim between our conversation, I've learned a lot more about you, and I've learned a lot more about how this whole thing might work, because seems to be nothing set in stone about it at the moment. It's all very fluid. So I can't in good faith recognize this as something worth supporting. So I'm sorry, but I won't be doing that. And I encourage none of you to put your name to it either. For a variety of reasons, which I've probably explained in detail in previous shows. So that might be a bit of a letdown for Jody and some of his supporters, but I don't think it should come as any surprise given the conversation that he and I had a few days ago. And it was a very jovial, friendly conversation. There was no animosity, and there is no animosity in what I'm saying here. It's just that I feel that there's no point in wasting the time and effort. We are fatigued. You, me, Guru, Kaz, everyone is fatigued, right? And that fatigue extends to patience with different things happening in the bowel movement at the moment. Because like all good bowel movements, sometimes things can be a bit unexpected. And occasionally they stink. So while we are still ejecting stinking shit out of our bowel movement, we've got no hope of coming together and completing anything, I don't think. And no matter how many documents you sign and no matter how many people you get to Canberra to have a picnic on the grass is going to change that. There is going to need to be more done to change that. And that's what Tim's plan was, to get the more done. Now, Tim's now just decided that it's impossible for him to go forward publicly as he had planned in a collaborative manner with all these constitutional brains, I'm going to call them, because none of them can be trusted. Well, that's untrue. Many of them can't be trusted because they're not going into it with an open heart. They're not going into it with honesty or honor in their heart. They're going into it with a plan to farm an audience they are incapable of attracting themselves. I wonder whether or not Keith from the Custodians could get 800 to 1,000 complete strangers who haven't paid him $15 a month to turn up in a room on a few days' notice. Of course they can't. That's why they come and farm people who can. And it's lazy. But what's more, it's insulting to the formerly freedom, now known as bowel movement, as far as I'm concerned. It goes to show that you don't have any honour, that you don't care for the people outside of how much they can pay every month and how many more of them you can get into your organisations. So I find that just a bit sad. And I don't care for anybody who wants to tell me that I'm the one being the divisive wedge in the movement. It's bullshit. I am simply pointing out what many of you see, what many of you know is happening, but for whatever reason do not stand up and say yourself. I'm just being honest. I'm telling you what I see. Now, sometimes I might be seeing things. I might be seeing things that don't exist. I might be seeing, stupid things. But if I'm seeing them, a lot of people are seeing them. And I seem to be the one who gets up to say, we see you doing this. Do you think that's okay to us? Whereas other people say, I can't do that, it'll be divisive. Well, it's not divisive to point out somebody who has a greater interest in their business than they do in what we're doing to try and fix a nation, to help we the people. These are the kind of people that'll turn into being the slave owners of the future. And yes, there will be slavery in the future. Absolutely. It'll be the way to punish those of us who didn't comply or didn't fall in line with somebody or didn't pay a certain amount of money every month to somebody so we could learn something. Anyway, I don't want to give them any more air. I'm just disgusted in them for doing it. There is a way out of it for them. Happy to show them that way if they're bereft of ideas. But frankly, I feel a bit like Tim. We don't really need them in the movement right now. I'm pretty confident that's the way I feel. And until they can prove that they're worthy of being out of the bowel and back into the proper, reconstituted, I hope, freedom movement. I hate the word. We have to come up with a new term because that one's been poisoned by people like this. So we will kick on. We, the people, are much stronger. We, the people, roll with the punches, and occasionally we get to throw a few. So unfortunately, we seem to be throwing them at ourselves, and that's self-inflicted. Right? Don't blame me because you put your head up and asked for it to be punched. Seriously. Take your trolls and Do whatever you like. You can write as much as you like. I get a mild amusement out of it in a perverse kind of way. It's a bit sick, really. But if you want to give me that kind of enjoyment, then okay, that's up to you. We'll get back with the SG Anon interview right after a very short break from Vince, who has got a new show he's done with Mark called Coin Toss on FBN Media. I was going to couple them together a little promo today so that you can go and check it out, but I didn't get enough time. So go to FBN Media on YouTube or on Rumble and check out Coin Toss, it's called. And if you're into crypto, it is a great way to introduce yourself to what crypto is and how it might be able to benefit you.
Hi, are you passionate about supporting independent media and social events? Voice of Freedom is dedicated to bringing you the latest happenings and things that matter. But we can't do it without your help. By donating, sponsoring, or becoming a member, you're not just supporting our mission. You're joining a community that values transparency and engagement. Your contributions allow us to continue producing high-quality content that informs and inspires. Visit VOFHQ.com to make a donation or explore sponsorship or membership opportunities. You can even donate using crypto. Together, we can amplify voices that deserve to be heard as we continue to create a vibrant platform for social change. Go to VOFHQ.com, help us to help you by joining us and making a difference today.
Today we have SG joining us on Truthseekers. Thanks so much, SG, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Sorry about that. I appreciate it. Good to be back.
Perfect. That's all right. So Dale and I are off camera today due to us both sitting in bed quite ill at the moment with the lovely flu going around here. So we've got Carl from Voice of Freedom that's going to be popping in and also helping us with the show. So thank you so much, Carl. And
You're
if
welcome.
we can, put it over to you, Carl. Let's kick off.
Well, thank you for the opportunity, first of all. Really appreciate it. The Truth Seekers audience is a great one, and I'm proud to be asked to be helping you out on your sick days. So thank you. And SG, thank you for coming on. Just before we hit the record button, you said we could probably talk for an hour and a half just on today's events alone, and I couldn't agree more. Probably the biggest question for me out of the last few hours is the warning that Donald Trump has issued to everybody in Tehran to get out of Tehran. Does this bode well for the people of Iran? Do we look like an Israeli nuclear weapon might be on the way?
And just sorry to cut in there.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, SG. China's just put out an announcement too for their people to evacuate their area.
Right, in Tehran.
Absolutely fascinating.
Yeah.
Well, I have to say, gentlemen, that's probably the biggest opening question right now on everybody's mind, with President Trump's Truth Social post and then the sudden departure from the G7, which in my opinion was not, in my opinion, there's no way that Trump went to the G7 to begin with, knowing that these types of events were going to happen without a plan and a little bit of an advance notice of what the landscape was actually going to be. You asked something that's really, really important, and it's gotten a lot of patriots' attention. And so I want to drill down on this and remind people that President Trump has made several overtures over the last 15 years or so, but especially in the last 8 years, where he has highlighted directly on interviews, on broadcasts, and even a couple of times in passing conversation that certain nations in the Middle East are not our friend. Certain nations who we bankroll, provide a great deal of military equipment to, a great deal of money and funding to, and have done so for a very long time, are not acting in our best interests. And in recent weeks, he's stated pretty plainly that Israel is not going to bully the United States into a particular position. So what we have going on then, this Truth Social post comes out, and it almost rings as though the American military is prepared to get involved in Tehran. But I would encourage people to read a little bit further into that and think about what Trump is actually trying to do here. In the last 48 hours, we've had multiple conflicting reports between U.S. officials and Israeli media on the ground in Israel there, specifically from Haaretz, discussing the idea that the United States is supporting the war in an aggressive posture, then they're not supporting the war in an aggressive posture. We have the Assistant Secretary of Defense just an hour and a half ago highlighting for the entirety of the world that the United States is taking only a defensive position. We're not going to respond or get involved in this conflict unless U.S. forces are directly attacked by Iran. We also have Prime Minister Netanyahu coming out, I believe it was today, it might have been yesterday. It's been within the last 36 hours, stating essentially that today it's Israel, tomorrow it's New York. And that's an exact quote that I'm bringing from that. So we have President Trump then putting out what sounds like a bell ringer of a Truth Social post and advising the entirety of the population of Tehran essentially to evacuate. And we saw an immediate response over in Tehran. Shortly after that post went out, highways began to fill up in Tehran. We have video footage coming out of Iran showing that the Tehran main highways headed out of the city are completely backlogged and log jammed to the point where they're not moving at all. And so one has to ask, what would be the reason for President Trump putting out such a salacious and gravitational, statement publicly for the world, knowing that that type of rhetoric is going to produce those types of kinetic on the ground responses, right? The influence of the president of the United States should not be underestimated here. And in my opinion, what we have going on is President Trump essentially doing an end run around Bibi Netanyahu. Now, we know that the Israeli military for a long time has planned something called the Samson option. The Samson option is essentially a coercive last-ditch effort for the Israeli Mossad intelligence and IDF community and all of their feeler arms around the planet to force various nation states to the table on behalf of Israel under threat of nuclear rogue attack or some sort of false flag attack on their soil that would spawn off a domestic situation of unrest that's simply not recoverable. We've also witnessed over the last 5 years, and this is where it gets really important, a lot of U.S. sniffer birds, electronic surveillance birds, nuclear sniffer birds, nuclear command and control platforms, all across the United States and in various areas of the United States and internationally over that last 5-year period of time, very, very active in the airspace. So that tells me that we've fundamentally been looking for some sort of threat-based actor or some sort of threat-based contingency in the homeland and monitoring for sort of a constant progression of what that threat analysis is going to be. We saw the United States Army through Blackhawks raiding a number of ports just a few months ago, and one of the big things that were put out by Anons at that time were some Club Ks had likely come into the eastern seaboard, and that was what the Army was likely there looking for. And we saw National Guard deployed to several ports during that Longshoremen's Association strike that we saw here in the United States for a brief period of time. So it's a long setup for this question, but the context is really, really important. And you just can't, I guess some people can, but I tend to wax a little bit poetic on it. You just can't spare some of the details because the devil is really in the details. If the Israeli military is planning something like a WMD strike on Iran, or if they're planning to bomb Iranian sites with nuclear weapons and then blame Iran for those radioactive events, say maybe saying here's the proof that Iran had a nuclear weapon because we dropped this bomb and look at what happened. If that was the case, if that's something that we're going to see, it would make a great deal of sense for someone that has the advanced knowledge of that to put out an advisory, a public service announcement saying, look, everyone probably needs to leave this area. It's not safe. But you can't come out as far as to say we're expecting an Israeli attack, right? You can't, you sort of can't throw that out for your enemy, because if your enemy is involved in the Israeli community or in the broader intelligence community of which Mossad is a major, major player, then they're not going to play the card that you're expecting them to play. So the deception has to be maintained. The escalation from that point, of course, would be in this hypothetical that we would have an instantaneous worldwide conflict. You would have a number of major world powers immediately at the table, probably China and Russia willing to kinetically get involved in the Middle East on behalf of Iran. You would have the United States having to field some extremely important decision-making and some very turbulent international and foreign policy decisions at that particular intersection. And I think you would have the invitation for the Turkish army to get involved and march directly down into Israel, which I've been saying for a long time is likely going to be the end result of what happens here. The Likud government, the Zionist-controlled Likud government inside Tel Aviv, is not reflective of the will of the Jewish people in Israel, nor is it reflective of the will of we the people around the rest of the planet. They're a rogue, murderous, terrorist state, just like North Korea, just like the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. This is not to say that Iran in this particular example is squeaky clean either. You have a huge component of infiltration inside Iran that's been essentially doing business with transnational criminal cartels and the Washington, D.C. bureaucratic deep state for a very long time. So there's a lot of entrenchment there, and I think you're seeing some of those entrenched factions beginning to shoot at one another rather than risk their ultimate public exposure, which is going to come before this process is over.
Is this a position that Donald Trump has been forced into by the neocons in the Republican Party? Because it seemed he's been caught out now, at least on two occasions, with the actions that were taken against Putin that he knew nothing about. They tried to assassinate him and while he was in a helicopter flight, apparently somewhere near Kursk, I want to say. And Trump knew nothing about that and was sort of wagging the finger at Russia because they had inflicted a bit of pain back on Ukraine. And then now, supposedly in the middle of negotiations with Iran, Israel launches a preemptive strike. It's not a very good partner if they're launching their weapons before you finish at the table. So is Trump being caught out? Is the bigger US military industrial complex actually driving all this, and Trump's just, trying to get ahead of it?
Well, I think it's a little bit of both. When we talk about being caught out, that implies sort of a naivete or a lack of foresight or foreknowledge. I would submit that the opposite is probably true, but that some of this is being intentionally allowed to play out to draw out the infestation in a lot of these different areas, right? We still have infestation as evidenced by the actions of recent commanders from U.S. Fifth Fleet and Central Command. We still have some infiltration and some infestation inside the Pentagon that is essentially splitting some of the policy as it pertains to the involvement with Israel on the ground, and may actually be part and parcel for some of the conflicting reports that we're getting out of the Middle East right now. The same is absolutely true inside Tehran and Tel Aviv. I think we can see that sort of prima facie on its face. But I think that it also applies in many regards to the infestation that exists and the infiltration that exists inside of Russia, inside some of the Western European nations, and certainly inside some of the Eastern European nations. So, the root of the question is, do we see Trump being maneuvered or forced into these positions by the actions of these other influential power players? I think the answer is yes and no. I think Trump is allowing some of it. I think some of it is a responsive measure and a responsive approach that he's taking towards a great deal of it. But again, it highlights those that are not America first. It highlights those that are not, say Iran first, for example, or Israel first, or even Egypt first, or Saudi Arabia first. It forces those individuals inside all of these different respective cultures to essentially declare their loyalty and showcase where they're willing to go and what they're willing to do. And when we saw the schism develop inside the Pentagon Central Command with respect to how actively involved the U.S. military should be with participating in Israel's hostilities and Iran's hostilities back towards Israel, I think that was a really good indicator and sort of another feather in the cap, if you will, to show that this is an enormously high risk smoke out operation that's happening. Because when things eventually begin to go off domestically here in the United States of America, as we recently saw with the United States Army parade in D.C., we're going to have a U.S. military that is trusted, that is respected, and that will follow the orders of the commander-in-chief and the officers appointed over them.
Just on that parade day, the No Kings movement had protests in some 2,000 towns and cities around the U.S. There wasn't as much disruption as many of us might have expected, I suppose, but there still was a certain amount of rock throwing, I guess, and smoke bombs going off. Do you think that the No Kings organisers, a Soros-backed organisation as near as I can find, could call this a success?
That's an interesting question, I have to say, and I don't think that they would call it a success per se. I think that what they would call it was a strategic test, how quickly they can organize, how quickly they can come together, and what the response is actually going to be from various law enforcement factions, both civilian and military. I'm anticipating that we're actually going to ratchet these domestic situations up a little bit more here in the United States, likely as a direct response to what's happening in the Middle East right now. We've seen an enormous amount of movement of military assets throughout the continental homeland in the United States, far more than what was required or what was even presented in that parade, which tells me fundamentally that the parade was a fantastic narrative cover to shift and move a lot of different assets around the country. We now have National Guard activations across several states, assisting law enforcement in these ICE raids. We saw President Trump declare a whole of government orientation from the executive branch towards this issue of illegal immigration and apprehension of migrants and migrant criminality. And what is so interesting in this whole process, and something I want to point out for patriots out there, is, while we go through and we prosecute and investigate and interdict all of the migrant situations, all of the various human trafficking and cartel trafficking that's gone on inside the United States, we're eventually going to arrive back at the funders of all of those organizations and movements, right? We're going to arrive back at the logistical coordinators, the individuals that actually facilitated the transport, the companies that facilitated the vehicles, for example, the associations that facilitated the money laundering for things like telephones and shoes and clothing and apparel and things like that. We're going to come back to all of these groups, and many of these groups are going to tie back to domestic entities, both individuals and organizations here in the United States of America. So in many ways, I'm expecting the No Kings Antifa camp, and I don't really distinguish those very much because there's a lot of overlap. We've seen Antifa embedded in these protests, a lot of the No Kings funding coming from the same groups that funded Antifa 4 and 5 and 6 years ago. I'm expecting them to really come back and try to make a resurgent attempt throughout the rest of the summer as the international chaos scene sort of kicks off a little bit more. And ultimately, I think we're going to end up at a point where we're going to see EO 13224 actioned here in the United States of America, and the U.S. military utilized to protect the nation against militarized terrorism.
Well, under previous EOs, the military are still in charge, aren't they? Or would have that lapsed when Donald Trump got elected for the second term this time round?
Well, so on that particular question, yes and no. Again, I hate to be that sort of split answer person, but we had a situation here in the United States where the military were essentially bequeathed overarching governing authority to ensure continuity of essential functions and to ensure continuity of the national mission. And we saw all of the different continuity components put together during the first Trump administration, actioned through executive order and U.S. law passed by the Congress in 2018 and 2019 leading into 2020. And we saw that live action period of continuity of government where the military essentially did the managing of the nation while the commander in chief actually toured around and attempted to unite the population, right? And we saw that process happen really sort of seamlessly, not without difficulty, but seamlessly throughout that period of time. Now we have the lawful commander in chief who was elected through lawful popular vote and electoral college victory here in the United States. With this most recent election, we saw a rescission of some of the executive order components from, I think it was EO 13961, which was the Federal Mission Resilience Order from Biden on the 19th of January, 2025, which would have restored components of the command and control back to the lawful office of the presidency and removed some of the overarching authoritative components that had been delegated to FEMA, for example, and to the Department of Homeland Security. So in some ways, yes, the answer is we saw some military control action throughout that period of time. Certainly, we've seen some military control since January of 2025, but I believe for the present moment in time, we are operating under a lawful command authority, but a command authority that is completely consumed and engulfed in multiple national emergencies that have not yet been adjudicated. And so those emergencies, EO 13224 being one of them, but several that are still active under Trump's initial executive orders from 2017, 2018, 2019, and on, all of those national emergencies, many of which are wartime and were declared by the commander-in-chief and can only be ended by the commander-in-chief, remain active and running to this day. And a situation, or scenario or sequence of events has to pop off inside the United States homeland to justify a complete intervention and a closing down of those national emergency conditions.
SG, I don't think you're any stranger to the biblical connotations in this war that are going on. Have you paid much attention, or do you give any attention at all to things like the mountains that are falling down around the world, or the volcanoes that are coming back to life, or the earthquakes that are happening. There seems to be an extraordinary amount of mountaintops falling off the Alps at the moment in Germany, in Switzerland, in Italy, and other places, and as well as volcanoes. And we are seeing for the first time a ramping up of talk about the sun's solar output and solar bursts affecting us here on Earth. Are we truly looking at these biblical times, this fight coming to us?
I think that waxes a little spiritual, but I would say that in many regards, we have to be living a biblical era, right? We're living an era of great exposure. The Greek root of the word apocalypse, if I'm not mistaken, loosely translates to the unveiling. So what we've got here throughout this period of time is a complete unveiling of the entirety of the machinations of the world. I would argue that's very much a biblical and a spiritual warfare event. Honestly, I think the best way to answer the question would be to say that Hillary Clinton believes that we're in a biblical period of time, so we probably should as well. If we go back to the WikiLeaks emails, which were leaked many years ago, of course, by Julian Assange and some of those investigative efforts early on, we saw that she was implicitly involved via personal and private email. It's been a long day.
Yeah.
Via personal and private email, she was involved in directing the CIA and compartmented factions inside the State Department to essentially locate and secure the tomb of Gilgamesh, and whether or not the remains of Gilgamesh, the epic sort of half god, half king from the the legend itself, whether or not that body was there and what else might have been located in the tomb with respect to technological advancements. The CIA at the time believed that there was a functional portal, a Stargate style a piece of ancient technology that was there that was still functional in the Iraqi desert. So, are we living biblical times? I think the answer is sort of, on its face, yes. And it's not just been biblical times, but it's been all of the different spiritual schools, right? We've seen a lot of books taken out of the Bible that have made a resurgence back. We've seen a lot of texts from the Indian schools and from the Arabic schools that have made a resurgence and a return back in this period of time. We're seeing records from the Inca, from the Egyptians being more furtherly digested and sort of promulgated out there across the information landscape. People are finally beginning to understand a little bit more of what they were talking about. The same is true of some of the Mayan legends, the Atlantean legends that have been re-explored in recent days, right? So I think in many regards, what we've got is not just a biblical period of time, but we have a whole of faith, a whole of divinity, if you will, period of time that we're living right now, where humanity is coming to understand that the record that we've had before, the archaeology, the historical component, the theological component, all of that serves to underpin the foundation of the very real world around us. And certain actors inside the deep state intelligentsia and bureaucratic community for a long time have understood those to be very real realities that they've been pursuing without our knowledge.
The red pill moment that a lot of us say has got to happen might take a number of different forms. It could be a nuclear holocaust in the Middle East, but it might also be the revelation of things hidden under things like the Khafre pyramid. The Italian university has released their 3D enhanced images of their survey that they did and discovered that vast chasm and what looked to be, well, they were termed sort of power generation units there. This chasm seems to be a lot bigger, a lot broader now too. There's other things in the world that are opening up, and archaeologists are being amazed. They're finding giant skeletons. Is this a mixture of red pills, or is it literally going to take the Palladian mothership to come down through the skies and land on the lawns of the White House before people open their eyes?
Well, we hope it doesn't take that long, because if it takes that long, we've got a long way to go between now and then, I'll just say. But with respect to that, the essence of the question is, how obvious does it have to be before people begin to really understand what's going on out there? I don't think that it's going to have to get to an Independence Day style moment, although it's been widely circulated throughout a number of different circles for a long time that Independence Day was sort of a psychological operation released via cinematic form to let people know what was eventually going to be planned to push for a total worldwide unification of government under a sort of a totalitarian super state architecture around the planet. And so, looking at that and appreciating how far the story could go and what actually exists, under the surface, so to speak. I could see where it could take a little while. But with some of the things happening in conflict right now, I don't anticipate that little while has to be 5, 10, 15, or 20 years. We've got new explorations happening under the Sphinx. Just as recently as a few months ago, where I saw some reports that they had discovered a hidden chamber, that they were going to be exploring that chamber throughout the summer and fall of this year. There's interesting legends that tie back to the Sphinx being an arbiter and a great sentinel guarding hidden knowledge for humanity that would eventually come into the world. The issue that you described a moment ago, these very large skeletons, the issue of giants, things like that, I think it's sort of becoming more publicly accepted, certainly in the alternative stream, but eventually going to come to the mainstream and sort of lapping at that shoreline already, where the idea of extraterrestrials, non-terrestrials, other terrestrials, whatever you want to call them, fellow sentient humanoid style life is going to be talked about as more of a reality rather than a sort of a fictitious idea or an out there belief system. All of our various holy texts point us in that direction. The Quran talks about giants. The Bible talks about giants. The Hindu texts talk about half gods, half people that came down from the skies and populated different areas of the planet. There's epics written all the way back in the Arabian heritage line that go talking about Gilgamesh and things like that from before. So this entire idea, again, sort of waxing off of the question that we just were talking about a moment ago, the spiritual component naturally leads into the idea that we're not alone, that God is not in a box, and that the entirety of the span of what we would call life itself is much broader, much wider, and much larger than our constructs growing up led us to believe. And fundamentally, that can be a good thing. But just like with any human being social dynamic that we're trying to impart and teach, right? We don't trust strangers because not everybody is okay with us, but we have to give them a little bit of time to gauge it and feel it out and sort of trust it for ourselves. I think that's the period of time that we're sort of entering into right now, and I'm anticipating, me personally, that period's not going to take a terribly long amount of linear time before we arrive at the acceptance of broader truths.
Just want to go back to Egypt for a second here and get your opinion on what the world looks like if Iran, China, and Russia decide to put a stop to whatever it is that Israel thinks it can get away with. Given that Israel is just barely the size of one of our good cow paddocks here in Australia, it's not a large area at all. And given that America could chime in and help support, but could it support that on 3 different fronts or 4? North Korea have also offered to come in and be involved. Pakistan apparently have offered up their nuclear weapons to Iran. What does the world look like if Israel's picked a fight and gets creamed?
Well, let's prognosticate a little bit and maybe speculate a little bit on that. The Gog and Magog war is the first thing that comes to mind. That would actually be a sensible template for what we have developing inside the Middle East right now. Russia, of course, being, I think, the land of Gog and the Magog area, and China being the kings of the East, for those out there that remember their biblical Sunday school lessons. But really, what I think we would have looking at geopolitically is we would have a complete breakdown of worldwide finance and energy markets, which is expected in the Great Awakening process overall. We would absolutely have a complete interruption, probably a stoppage of trade throughout the Suez Canal for a period of time as that situation in the Middle East begins to pop off. And we would have activation of what I would call the Hail Mary or the Joker card assets that the intelligence community, both Mossad and otherwise, has implanted and imbued all around the rest of the world. And the Western world nations are going to be pretty significantly impacted by whatever activations come, because again, this entire process from 2017 to now has achieved a number of different objectives, and it's had a number of different objectives, but one of the overarching missions that has never stopped and has never been fully completed is the ongoing smoke out, the burnout, if you will, of saboteurs, agents provocateur, those that are on the side of the enemy essentially, but well embedded within our ranks. And so you would see that, in my opinion, activate relatively quickly. On the other side of that, assuming a relatively dramatic progression of events over, say, a few days or a few weeks in time, I think it's not unlikely that you would see Turkey actually get themselves involved and begin an invasion throughout the Syrian countryside, to the far west, down northerly towards Lebanon and into Israel. I've been predicting since 2024 that Turkey would eventually be the sword that NATO runs itself on and would actually force the dissolution of the NATO defensive alliance in everything but name, because I don't foresee the rest of the NATO world invoking an Article 5 event to come to Turkey's aid. So in that period, in that particular sequence, in that example, in a period of time that would follow from that, I think that we would see pretty unequivocally that the Turkish army would make its way to Israel very rapidly. I think you would see any factions, any sort of regional powers that still stand on the side of the Mossad and the IDF come to Israel's aid in that particular moment in time. How much that, how much that gets, or how big that expands to, or whatever the best way to say that is, I'm really not sure. That might be a little bit beyond my pay grade, but I cannot see Russia and China not being involved in at least some capacity once Turkey eventually does get involved, because you have Chinese interests with both Turkey and Iran. Turkey has a huge financial partnership and a reliance with Saudi Arabia. They have if I'm not mistaken, there's a loan for multiple billions of dollars worth of gold that Saudi Arabia gave to Turkey a couple of years back. Russia has a vested interest in everything that happens with BRICS, and Saudi Arabia is going to be on their radar as well. So, and of course, Syria and the entire situation that has gone on there, there's a lot of Russian military bases, a lot of Russian military personnel that are still in the Syrian countryside even now. So looking at that, I could see, this becoming a very sort of worldwide event relatively quickly. How quickly again, that's probably above my pay grade, and how long it stays a tense worldwide situation is going to be dependent, in my opinion, entirely on the actions of Putin, Xi, and President Donald Trump.
It's very much a political war. The people are not involved, and in fact are quite opposed in both Iran and Israel. The Israeli populace want Netanyahu and his Zionist regime removed, and the same could be said of the Iranian people wanting the mullahs and the Ayatollah gone, and the very I guess ancient practice or style of religion that they practice, of Islam that they practice, a very rigid style. So the people are against their leaders in both states, and yet their leaders seem to be claiming to do everything for the people. How long do you think it'll be before the people actually wake up, the majority who aren't awakened yet, and see this for what it really is, a bunch of old men playing war games with young people of each nation?
The thing is here, Carl, was, and you haven't touched on it yet, neither of you gentlemen, is that, Saudi Arabia are the biggest players right now, moving through the Middle East up into Turkey, and you guys are touching it on. But why? The question is why? There's a oil and gas line getting built. Now, who are the partners and what countries this new oil and gas line is running through? You got to remember, Nord Stream pipeline was taken out for a reason. Now we got all these contracts and communications through the Middle East, and now we got conflicts because they need to cut partnerships, they need to flatten the infrastructure out to rebuild, restructure. It's all to do with the oil and gas. Like you said, it's the big boys playing the game.
Very true.
I'd like to piggyback off of that, if I could, and say that is the underpinning lead-in for the awakening process that I think you're referencing with that question, Kyle. And so, the question of what is the pace of the awakening inside these groups, how long is it going to take? I think that we're really sort of there. We've witnessed the Israeli population, for example, get very, very anti-Netanyahu very, very quickly, and they were already leaning in that direction with the craziness and the idiotic behavior of the Israeli Likud government during the pandemic period of time. And so we saw this war then pop off in Gaza. The Israeli population understood sort of right from the get-go that this completely defied logic and reason that something like that could happen, that a bunch of, basically well-funded cavemen could utilize dirt bikes and scooters and penetrate the most heavily guarded and heavily monitored border anywhere in the world. Nobody actually believes that, including the Israeli people. And so we saw millions, literally millions, turning out in the streets of Tel Aviv over the last 12 months, especially basically protesting for an end to the conflict in Gaza, for to bring the Israeli soldiers home, to bring our sons and daughters home, and to arrive at some sort of position at the table where a ceasefire was achievable, and then we could move on from there. Of course, we've not seen that occur with any sort of substance or any lasting effect between the Israeli government and Hamas for reasons that we could sort of wax philosophically on for a long time. But it's driven the population to an even higher degree of dislike. Now the conflict with Iran is working the same psychological operation, if you will, on the Iranian population. You're seeing pockets of revolution beginning to break out in at least two different provinces in Iran. We're seeing flag burning, Iranian Republic flag burning of the image of the Ayatollah Khomeini. We're getting localized reports, unconfirmed right now, but again, coming out of Iran purportedly that suggests civilians and local citizenry are in conflict with provincial level IRGC personnel. So I think we're looking right now at that precipice moment for those cultures. How long is too long? Well, I think too long is 2025 and a major warfare situation between Tel Aviv and Tehran, which both population groups and both what we would call ordinary, we the people, common men on both sides of that fence understand that no one actually wins in that conflict, but everybody does lose. And so you're seeing a mass exodus right now from Israel via sea and air. So much so that the Israeli government has actually determined that no flights are going to be allowed to carry Israeli civilians out of the countryside. You're seeing Israelis paying thousands of shekels just in the last 24 hours to get on yachts, private yachts to flee the country and head towards Cyprus. At the same time, again, you're seeing the Iranian population getting the heck out of Dodge in the other direction. We saw Pakistan actually close the border forcefully with Iran because you had such an exodus of individuals out of the borders of Iran headed towards Pakistan, understanding that this conflict between these two very corrupt government factions is not going to think twice at all about putting the entirety of the citizenry in the crosshairs. The citizenry understands that. And I think, again, you're seeing pockets of that citizenry, at least in Iran, beginning to break out in a revolutionary style and really push for change.
What about if we, on all these topics, let's talk about the technology and AI. You gotta have a look at the Gaza Strip with the Lavender systems, right? And then you go look into Palantir and what the US is involved in, and have a look into, all right, well, with all these missile strikes from Israel into Iran with the first strike, they use these systems. So, my opinion and view, when you say the US isn't involved, well, they're using the US AI system to make these strikes. Have you looked into this, SG, with Palantir and Lavender system and AI capabilities of warfare?
Well, when I say looked into it, I've done some what I would call surface level research, and I'm familiar with the basic machinations of how some of that is working. I've not deep dived on Palantir because a lot of other Anons out there have done great work and research on that. I don't see any reason to reinvent the wheel. Fundamentally, I don't really agree with Palantir on any significant front with respect to what it stands to impose on humanity versus what we stand to gain from it. I will say that I found it very, very fascinating that the U.S. Army on a military parade sort of day and a celebratory day, June 14th, 2025, chose to use Palantir as a main sponsor, sort of as a title sponsor, if you will, for that parade. And Palantir would certainly offer the United States military in an EO 13224 style situation the vast real-time information processing capability needed to go after anyone involved in organized terrorism or an organized insurrection against the government. So on that side of the coin, I'm willing to say yes, it may have some usefulness about it, but fundamentally I'm sort of against it on principle, and I have to remain that way. With respect to the conflict that's now happening in the Middle East, and even the conflict in Ukraine and the coming conflict with Taiwan, which I'm still very surprised here we are 2025, and that's not spawned off in a much more kinetic and obvious way. That is still a marker along in this journey. That's still sort of a ticking time bomb, if you will, along the path that has to happen before we can consider this period of time fully adjudicated and seen all of the way through. So that's, yet another thing that I think we should put a pin in and watch for it as it comes down the line. But the role of AI in both the propagandizing on behalf of the war efforts for all parties involved, but also the actual usage of AI systems in the targeting and the action, the actioning of the mechanisms and the actual deployment of weaponry, personnel, things of that nature. I think that we shouldn't underestimate that. Russia has absolutely been utilizing that and testing some of it with their semi-autonomous drones. They've managed to basically string together, for lack of a better term, through electronic coordinated programming, hundreds of drones at a time, and steer them in sort of multi-dimensional and multi-level ways. Multilateral ways is the word that I'm looking for, to allow for evasion against air defenses and things like that. Much of that is AI supported. We know that targeting systems inside the United States military are being upgraded to include AI. President Trump himself told us that, I believe it was at the National Guard Bureau Association speech from 2024, where he was going to look at AI, quantum computing, and things like that, and the efficacy of integrating those types of technologies into current battlefield arrays, such as targeting and identification. So, it's the AI discussion, I think, is one that ethically requires a midpoint, because we're so early on in what would be considered a major industrial, sort of like a digital revolutionizing of the landscape of the world, that we really don't know the direction it's going to go at this point in time. Serious caution, in my opinion, is needed. But again, it offers some great benefits. And what we're seeing on display right now, in my opinion, are some of the drawbacks from it as well.
Is there any truth to the rumor that the USS Missouri is being refitted as a quantum battleship?
I had not heard that rumor at all. So truthfully, I have no idea, but that has just gone up to the top 5 items for me to begin looking into, because that would be absolutely wild.
Well, the story I have is
enjoy that one.
The story I have is that part of that refit is in fact happened where she sits, which is in New York, isn't it? So some of that's happening right on the Hudson River in New York.
Absolutely incredible, but it would make a great deal of sense, right? We're looking at modernizing the fighting force. We may not need to expand it dramatically, especially with the fighting force that the military of the United States has built up over the last century or so. But modernization is absolutely key. That's part of one of the reasons we saw such an attrition of the NATO stockpile, both from the United States and Western European countries, into Europe, into Eastern Europe, and in Ukraine in 2023 and 2024. Russia was essentially just obliterating all of the old NATO equipment going back 30, 40, in some cases 50 years old. And so in my opinion, that was a purposeful destruction operation to clean out the old warehouses to make room for new things. And something like what you just described would absolutely fit that billet.
Yeah. Well, fingers crossed that comes through. With Donald Trump leaving the G7 meeting early, he was unable, unfortunately, to meet up with Anthony Airbus Albanese, our Prime Minister. High on the list of things that Albo wanted to talk about was AUKUS. I'm not sure how much of that you're into, but what is your feeling about the future of the AUKUS deal, our nuclear submarines being ready for Australian deployment sometime after 2030?
I don't think I had formed a fully fleshed out opinion on that just yet, but I find it very interesting that a lot of Five Eyes nations and what Five Eyes adjacent nations, for lack of a better term, are sort of modernizing their arsenal in this period of time. And so when we look at what's happening throughout the entirety of the world, right, we have this schism that has developed inside many of these countries and certainly inside many of our military factions. Some of those factions are going to need leverage against the other factions. Quite literally, in some cases, we have patriots comprising 25, 30, 35% of flag officer command level, and you have an over 60% sort of weighted scale in the other direction for those that are globalist warlords who are only interested in consolidation of power and eventually holding holding and wielding the torch at the end of the day if things do go kinetic. So one of the ways that you can really leverage against those components is to have things like WMDs, for example, or nuclear capable or high level weaponry capable platforms and systems that are not under the control of those terroristic actors or those warlord style actors inside various ministries of defense and power in the Western world. And so I think it's very possible that this is part of that same build out happening through Australia with the Australian military, and the same sort of galvanizing and polarizing, if you will, of that leverage to come. And we know beginning in 2020, this began a very longitudinal period of time where we saw essentially a high level military operation that had been stewing and gestating and operating in beta testing phases, for lack of a better term, in the background, really come into the foreground with 2020. And I've heard many different military pundits and commentators talk several different times across different interview platforms over the years about how once the military forces of the United States were able to get a foothold, to get a foot in the door, if you will, against that infiltration that had occurred both in their ranks and in the civilian government ranks, it would be a 10-year process at least for those factions to drive, the traitorous factions, if you will, out of government and out of control. And so the timetable, with it being shortly after 2030 for these submarines to come online, it would make a great deal of sense and would track right along with that.
Speaking of weapons, on your own channel, you've put up some of the vision coming from both sides of the war in the Middle East at the moment, with Israel and Tehran. People in the streets of Tehran cheering as certain government establishments are being bombed in Iran. And in Israel, what I found interesting was the way that Iran attacked Israel with a lot of very old cruise weapons, cruise missiles, that depleted the Iron Dome store. And what followed behind those cruise missiles looked to me, and I'm only, a nobody on the outside looking in, but they looked like hypersonic missiles that were being launched into Tehran, coming in at unbelievable speeds. Would I be right in saying that?
Well, the reports of the hypersonics right now, I consider still unconfirmed, but what is not in doubt are high power, high speed ballistics being utilized. And yes, you're exactly right on the stratagem, right? We saw Tehran deploy some of their junk, some of their garbage, if you will, almost chaff with rocket power on the back of them to deplete the ability of the Iron Dome to respond, also to gauge where the Iron Dome's vulnerabilities and weak points really were. And following up to that, we saw these sort of cascaded and tiered missile barrages. I think we've seen 3 or 4 of them so far in the last 72 hours, and those barrages seem to have demonstrated an above 50% success rate. That's one of the reasons that Israel really moved hard over the last 12 hours to shut down reporting from certain areas inside the country, likely to prevent, in my opinion, public narrative from sort of turning against them and allowing them to sort of craft the narrative a little bit more in their favor. But the conditions on the ground speak for themselves. The Bazan oil refinery in Haifa was struck by several ballistic missiles. That's an 8 million tons per day refinery in the city of Haifa. It's one of the largest refineries in the entirety of the state of Israel. And the Bazan Group put out a memorandum today stating that as a result of the attacks, the entirety of that refinery is now offline, as well as all of its subsidiary factions that run adjacent to the main plant. Additionally, we saw several military control posts and command headquarters hit. A number of residential buildings hit with these missiles, and it really turned parts of Tel Aviv into, sort of like a Gaza-esque war zone in many respects. So I think the conclusion here with Tehran and with the Iranian strike itself is that the Israeli Iron Dome, while effective against, more conventional weaponry, and that success rate was really only about a 7 in 10 success rate at that, it is not effective. In fact, it's woefully ineffective in many regards with advanced high-power first-world weapons, modern weaponry. And this is what Iran is bringing to the table through partnerships with China, partnerships with Russia and other nations out there. Plus, Iran themselves, I think it's worth highlighting that the Persian culture itself is multiple thousands of years old. They're very resilient. They're very, very intelligent. They understand how to fight. You're talking about the culture that goes back to Cyrus the Great, right? So they understand how to fight. They're very willing to fight. And the Shiites themselves have sort of a penchant for long suffering that other factions inside the Muslim world are not really known for. And so, in that sense, it would make a great deal of sort of logical conclusion, in my opinion, to assume that the Iranians are going to strike in an escalating form, using their most ineffective weapons first, and then moving towards the most effective. I don't believe by the time this is over that you're going to have much of a habitable area left inside certain high, what you would call high priority, excuse me, high priority targeting zones. There we go. Again, been a long day. I don't think you're going to have much left of that. And frankly, with respect to Tehran, it's worth noting that their air defense systems are not as modernized as their offensive weaponry and equipment is, their offensive array. And so you're seeing a lot of Israeli success actually getting inside Tehran, inside the borders of the country there. So far, we've not seen, excuse me, outright Israeli Air Force sorties. We've seen mostly missile and drone strikes in that area. It's very possible that we could see live manned sorties here relatively soon. So, we have sort of advantages and disadvantages playing out on both sides. And one of the things it's highlighting for the world is who was all talk at the end of the day and whose bark actually came with a little bit of bite as well.
Do you think that bark is surprising the Israelis a bit?
Well, based on the reports of the mass exodus happening by both sea and air prior to the shutdown of the airspace, I think it's sort of beyond a doubt that the Israeli government was not anticipating such a shortfall, and the Israeli public itself also was anticipating more success with the Iron Dome system against a modernized, Arabic state opponent, and we're not seeing that play out in that form.
I feel like I've really taken over Becio's show here. Dale, have you got anything you'd like to add?
Yeah. I'm just trying to not cough when I'm talking. So, you're doing a good job, Carl. But I'm just chatting with Beck in the background. I just want to backtrack on some things. We're talking about the G7 summit, and President Trump. He made an appearance and disappeared. But out of everything I've seen,
very well. I look forward to that. The G7 used to
play back.
The G8, Barack Obama and a person named Trudeau didn't want to have Russia in. And I would say that was a mistake, because I think you wouldn't have a war right now if you had Russia in. And you wouldn't have a war right now if Trump were president 4 years ago. But it didn't work out that way. But it used to be the G8, and now it's, I guess, what's that, 8 years ago, it switched over. They threw Russia out, which I claimed was a very big mistake. Even though I wasn't in politics then, I was very loud about it. It was a mistake in that you spend so much time talking about Russia, and he's no longer at the table. So it makes life more complicated. But you wouldn't have had the war. Other than that, I think we're going to accomplish a lot.
Wow. So I found that very interesting, those comments at the G7, talk about Russia, getting kicked out by, Mr. Renegade, Obama. So, are we going to see some kind of peacetime coming, and Russia coming back into the scene? So there's one little comment I found extremely interesting from the G7 appearance. And there's something I also saw, if you can bring it up back, a picture on South Australia's main newspaper, an article, front page.
Yeah, I'll bring that up. Just a little warning, SG's got around 10 minutes left, so.
Roger.
Yeah.
So something about China, Taiwan, I think this will prick your interest, SG, is that this is on the front page of the newspaper here in South Australia this morning. If Carl, if you want to read the little description there.
Yep. So Trump's ex-security czar in China offers the warning: prepare for war. Donald Trump's former national security advisor, H.R. McMaster, told the advertisers that defending Australia summit in China is preparing for war with Taiwan while looking for weakness in the West.
And we got currently some war games training with the US commencing here in Australia too.
I have to say, I find the headline very fascinating. It's obvious with the overinflated giant font there that they're attempting to instill a fear-based response, much like the mask up 3 times and make sure to keep away from people at the playground or you'll die sort of headlines that we saw throughout the whole COVID pandemic period. And I would hope at this point in time that we have enough awake patriots out there to look at things like that and recognize that for what it is. Also, I find it very interesting. H.R. McMaster, not someone that would be very high on my trust list for a whole lot of reasons. And Anons out there have done a lot of digging and exposure on that gentleman and a number of his connections to the intelligence community, the industrial complex community, the defense industrial base community over the last 10 years' time. So, fundamentally what that looks like, in my opinion, and again, this sort of continues with the smokeout theme that I've been really drilling down on since the beginning of this Trump presidency, right? Just because we saw President Trump ascend back into power mostly peacefully, and I was surprised to see that happen in January. I was glad for it, but I was surprised to see that happen. But just because we saw that, it does not mean that we don't still have an infiltrative, entrenched opponent who is capable of resisting our efforts and who immediately after Trump's ascension back to power lawfully in January of this year began doing exactly that. And so, in my opinion, you've got another individual here with tiebacks to the defense community, tiebacks to the defense industrial community, certainly having influence over individuals that may still be at Pentagon and in certain bureaucratic levels. This type of person now going live on newspapers and interviews and things like that, hyping up a warfare situation. It reminds me of John Bolton and some of his rhetoric as he was sort of doing the parade tours throughout the mainstream media, talking heads and talking shows and things like that during the first Trump presidency, attempting, in my opinion, to sort of maneuver and force the patriotic movement behind President Trump into an untenable situation where they would have to capitulate to the forever war machine. And I just don't see that playing out here any differently than we've seen it play out over the last 7 to 8 years, which has been markedly unsuccessful.
Yeah. Are you aware, was it 2 months ago, I reckon, we're ticking along, that the China sent some battleships around Australia and they did some live firing exercises between New Zealand and Australia. And the only reason why our government knew about it was due to communications from, I think it was Qantas flight pilots saying that there's activity happening between Australia and New Zealand in international waters, but then they continue to circle Australia. So, that's where I find that article interesting, where that, they're just poking the West, trying to find weaknesses, and maybe it's telling Australia we aren't ready for what's to come yet.
Well, and I have to say my answer on that would probably be a little bit more speculative as well, but I want to highlight that Q drop that goes back a number of years where Q directly postulates the question, what if Russia and China are coordinating with POTUS, Donald Trump, to eliminate the New World Order, the NWO? And if that is the case, and if we surmise for a moment that that is actually at play here, what could the Chinese have been doing? What could the benefit of that be? And in my opinion, one of the benefits of that would be to provide enough bait, enough of that sort of interactive game board landscape, if you will, to force the rats to come to the table and take the cheese, right? Anyone that's interested in a conflict is going to be glued to the screen in those types of situations. Anyone that's interested in a conflict with Taiwan, for example, is going to be glued to the screen with everything that China does around Taiwan. They've been increasingly saber rattling for a number of months now, but true to form and really sort of true to their Chinese and Asiatic roots, we've seen tremendous amounts of patience displayed in that area. Very slow, deliberate, methodical movements, followed up with very quick bursts of activity, and then it sort of dies back down again. So I hate to keep coming back to the repetitive point here, but it's probably a great point even to close off with. In my opinion, we are still in a smoke out operation and have been since the entirety of this current Trump presidency and the lead-in period prior to it during the live action continuity operation that we all called Biden, because that was the perfect position. That was the perfect public excuse to make a lot of maneuvers and a lot of levers move around the entirety of the planet in specialized theaters and in specialized areas to force pressure against those entrenched opponents to come out into the light, to force individuals inside government, inside finance, inside corporations, inside defense associated business interests and things like that, to bring themselves forward for the public at a time when the digital ecosystem allowed for mass exposure. And so, in my opinion, we're seeing more of that same thing continuing through to the present day and time, really popping off heavily right now in the Middle East. But I'm still expecting South America to pop off in this way. I'm expecting a full-scale war with Venezuela and Caracas, with one or multiples of their neighbors. Colombia seems to be the favorite right now for who's actually going to be a militarized opponent against Venezuela. And the intelligence community infestation inside South America is at the very least just as bad, if not worse, than the intelligence community infestation that has gone on in the Middle East and Caucasus regions over the last 75 to 85 years or so. So it almost seems a little bit shortcoming in the answer. I think patriots, they want more detail. They want to hear a different result when we look at things happening out in real time. And of course, there's this impatience, I think, that all of us have as we look at how awake we are relative to the rest of the population. But truly, it does have to be an organic event for everyone, and it does have to provide the entirety of this landscape that we're living through right now does have to provide enough fodder, enough cheese, and enough risky situations to draw out those factions that are used to hiding under deep cover for a long time, that are very used to enduring presidential administrations and new Congresses and new appointees over top of them and things like that, and they just sort of plug along in the background. We've seen that really showcased in painfully obvious ways with the judiciary over the last 5 to 6 months. And it is worth keeping in mind for patriots out there, at least with the U.S. judiciary, it's worth keeping in mind that the U.S. military, that other compartmented corporation-style militaries inside the Western world and former Commonwealth realms are also subject to those same types of infestations and sort of long enduring and long suffering pulpits in the background that really have a great deal of effect and a great deal of sway on where we're able to put the needle and where and how conflicts actually arise and conclude. So, I know that's a long answer to that question, but fun, and it's a little bit of a speculative too, because I'm operating with just a little bit of information on it. But when we look at the landscape playing out the entirety of the world over, it appears consistently more and more every day that we are forcing the conditions on the ground in every operational theater necessary to galvanize the entirety of whatever entrenchment happens to be at play in those arenas. Once that entrenchment is brought out into the fore, excuse me, and either publicly defeated or publicly adjudicated and neutered, until we have that period of time, I think we're going to see these conditions escalate. We're going to see these surface level landscapes become a little bit more chaotic, a little bit more pressured, a little bit more tense, until such a point that the public appetite really is sort of at a fever pitch for a true accountability and true justice across international boundary lines.
Well,
Exactly.
I would like to thank you very much for your time today. It's been once again a joy to talk to you and get your insights into what's going on in the world. And I understand you've got to shoot off and be somewhere else. Probably spend a bit of family time, I dare say, at this time of the day. So thank you, SG, again. Maybe head off to bed.
Thank you so much,
Well, it's
SG.
been an honor, and
Thank you so much, SG.
Yeah, absolutely. I love coming on with you all. It's one of my favorite conversations that I get to have sort of semi-frequently. I apologize for lack of company here. I'd be a little bit more enduring if I wasn't dealing with a little bit under the weather myself on this end. But suffice to say, I'm really excited for where we're at right now. It seems tumultuous. It seems very tenuous. I know a lot of patriots out there are very, very nervous about the things that are happening in the world. But if we were not in control in certain regards, if we did not have influence at the patriotic level in many, many ways, we would be currently experiencing a literal hell on earth landscape. That's not what is actually happening, despite pockets of extreme difficulty out there. So I would encourage patriots to just hang with it, It is a war. It does require some sacrificing. It does require some patience, and it does require a willingness to sit back and say, maybe we don't know everything at first, but it's going to come out in the wash. And at the end of the day, God won this conflict in 2017.
Exactly. I love
What you're seeing there, folks, is a food aid convoy or a food aid station in Gaza. You can see how many hungry Palestinians there are fighting for bags of rice. Now, while Israel is busy firing missiles into Iran, they're not firing that missiles, at least, into Gaza. But this is what they are fighting. So machine gun fire coming from the Israeli side, firing into the people who are trying to get whatever crumbs there are in that food convoy. It's painful, it's difficult, and I find it very hard to find any justification at all for what Israel is appearing to do at the moment. At any rate, I think it's time we check the news.
Thing is bad. It's just as terrible as you imagined, and probably worse. With more, we go to Tom Lee Cruz. Tom Lee.
We're all in danger, Dan Lee.
Jesus Christ, what can we do?
Absolutely nothing.
It was good knowing you, Tom Lee.
I can't say the same.
That was unnecessary. We're just now getting in reports that all the children have exploded. They will be missed. Let's check in with Olivia Lee Rodrigo. Olivia Lee, where are you?
That's none of your business. Do you hear that? Cut the music. Do you hear that?
What do you hear?
That's the sound of us slowly dying. Can you hear it?
I can hear it. It's louder in my left ear.
Olivia Lee Rodrigo reporting
I
from
actually
where
have some
I
more
am.
questions for you. Okay, we're going to go to Kevin Lee Costner, who has more with politics.
No, I don't.
Let's send it over to our senior correspondent, Nick Lee Minaj.
Look at this chart. Let's bring it up.
What am I looking at here?
I don't know, but it doesn't look good.
That looks bad.
Yeah, it's probably bad.
Let's go to our eye in the sky, Timothy Chalamet. Timothy.
Man, I am so high up right now.
You are in a helicopter.
I didn't know that when I got in. I thought it was a weird car.
What do you see up there?
Everything. It's too much. We were never supposed to see this. I need to go back down.
You stay right there. We're going to go to commercial.
Have you recently lost a child because they exploded? Because that's crazy. How are we all not talking about this? I feel like that really got glossed over real quick. That's a huge thing. Call Ted Lee. 555 call Ted Lee. I want to talk about this. Call Ted Lee now.
And we're back. Let's check in with Morgan Lee Freeman with sports. Morgan Lee.
I just want to take this sports time to say that whatever you hear about me in the next 24 hours is completely false. People are going to say things and have documents and recordings to back up what they say, and it's just not real. You should believe me and not their solid evidence. Knicks take it by 2.
This is when champions are born. We're going now to Frankly Sinatra with the weather, Frankly.
It's everywhere.
We won't be hearing from him anymore. Coming up, a cat learns how to water ski and then drowns.
So I just got to say, I needed a laugh. I thought you might like a laugh, and I hope that gave you a laugh. The news as it appears right now. And that's essentially what our news services are like on a daily basis, aren't they? I don't know. It's just ridiculous. Kang, yes, they do consider us Goyim. We are Goyim, 100%. In the great scheme of things, we are Palestinians, as I saw somebody else post up there. Katrina, what's happened to Bosie? Seems to have disappeared. I don't know, maybe he's in a bunker somewhere waiting to be awarded the prime ministership so he can come out and tell us what to do. I don't know. He doesn't answer phone calls or emails. I'll be honest, I haven't tried ringing him or emailing him in a long time, but he doesn't make phone calls or emails to me, let's put it that way. And I was talking to Guru the other day. I don't think that there's too much communication going on there either. Fern, you made a comment in there while we were talking with SG. Don't worry about those people dying. This was regarding the exchange between Iran and Israel. And I haven't looked recently, so the last time I sort of checked these numbers was this morning. But one of the interesting things for me about this battle is that there are very few people dying on both sides. Their targeting seems to be amazing. The Israeli targeting system is really knocking out with pinprick precision factories, missile-making factories, or uranium enrichment plants, knocking out their Islamic Guard headquarters. Apparently, they've knocked over the Ayatollah Khomeini's first advisor, the guy who would be next. So he's gone. They've knocked over the head of the security services. He's dead. But in retaliation, the Iranians have leveled the Mossad building in Tel Aviv, along with a number of other government and intelligence agency related buildings that contained, I believe, a lot of computing power. They are also targeting, or have targeted very successfully, as you heard SG say, in Haifa, a processing plant, a petrol fuel oil processing center there. That is a massive, massive, massive hit to Israel. And my only thoughts here are, listening to the way Bibi Netanyahu has ramped up the rhetoric today, he is almost apoplectic at the fact that the Iranians are going to launch a nuke. The Iranians don't have to launch a nuke. It seems that they have more than enough old technology weapons. Bear in mind, they've been building them for 30 or 40 years and stockpiling them underground. None of those stockpiles have ever been hit by anything from Israel or anywhere else for that matter. And they do have very good air defense systems. They do have very good air-to-ground missile systems, or ground-to-air missile systems, I should say. So the Jewish-controlled mainstream media aren't going to be giving you a fair representation of the fight that Iran is putting up. But just watch some of that vision. All of those old cruise missiles are being used to drain away the Iron Dome weaponry. It's hard to keep those rocket launchers working 24/7. I think you can only fire 2 or maybe 4 missiles out of a launcher before the launcher is useless. Generates too much heat in the launch process and starts warping things. So some of the systems aren't working at all. I wonder if that's the American Patriot system. And the Patriot missile batteries are not fast enough to catch these missiles, which Netanyahu, in a press conference earlier this afternoon, came out and said are traveling at least Mach 6. Now, you can see them coming into Israel with pinpoint accuracy. They're hitting buildings. They are not leveling blocks. They are leveling the building, or they're going very deep underground and exploding. These are very, very high-tech weapons. And I think that the Mossad and Israel got it wrong. The Israeli intelligence fell over somehow, because they're chirping about a nuclear war or a nuclear weapon, and yet they're the only ones who plan on using one, judging by what Donald Trump has said. And who knows, in the last hour or so, I haven't looked to see, but it may well be quite possible that that they've dropped something like that. I found it also quite interesting that there was an interesting comment SG made about the, oh God, it's just gone out of my head. Sorry about that. It's flipped. I was going to talk about, no, definitely gone out of my head. So forget it. I'll move on to the next and final thing for the night. I haven't played all of this. I haven't seen all of this, but by the sounds of it, Pauline Hanson is starting to rise up and trying to collect the patriotic vote in Australia. This came out of X earlier today, so let's see what she has to say. Play. Come on, dear.
Breaking news.
Wrong one. Let me remove that and put Pauline up. like that. I've probably got to hit play on this screen. It's not a very delicate pause screen for her, is it? But here we go.
Our rights have been stripped from us. Our freedom of speech is being taken from us. And we're just being diminished as a people who we are, our pride in ourselves. This woke agenda has just gone too far. But the most important thing that we will face is about immigration. Who we will be seen as an Australian. Please consider what I have been saying. The people we allow into this country, how they come here and use our laws against us, the hatred that they bring, they're not adding to the country. We've seen the unrest on our streets. And this is because we have weak leaders in our Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, and his ministers, and you'll see it from the other state premiers, did nothing about it to get to this stage. Strong leadership, strong policies will be the only way forward. With my immigration policy, stop people coming in from countries that have no compatibility with our culture, our way of life, our laws. Don't bring them in from these countries filled with hate. Bring back to temporary protection visas. Get rid of the 75,400 people that are here who've overstayed. They're not all on visas. Some of these came here as refugees on the boats or get off planes. These people have overstayed. What have the government done about it? Absolutely nothing. We're in a housing crisis. We need people here that are going to enhance this country, and we have. The wonderful migrants that have come, a lot of these migrants are proud Australians. They've stood for me as candidates in my elections under the banner of One Nation. That's what we are, one nation. Why do we have to treat people totally different? Why do we head down this path? Why don't we have strong laws that says we're proud, we are Australian, fly the flag, be proud of a nation, who we are? But that never seems to happen. So at this next election, it is your choice. You mark the ballot paper. Stop asking where are my preferences going. Understand the system. You own your preferences. You alone will decide who will be the next government. Make sure you mark the ballot paper the right way, because it's about you. Not about me, it's about you.
Well, Pauline seems angry. Finally. No, she gets angry a lot, or nervous. We were just discussing in the chat. She does sound a bit nervous. Look, I don't know. I think you all know my feelings on current sitting politicians. I don't think that there is a solution for us going forward with the current crop or any members of the current crop. I think we need something new, something completely new, and probably just a little bit different to what we're used to. But what would that be? Well, that would have been something that would have been a wonderful public thing to be part of with Tim Dwyer, but for the reasons outlined at the start of the show, we won't be doing that any further, sadly. I'm not going to go on about that any further. We'll leave it at that, but I would just say, remember, to the trolls, just remember, don't go running around telling lies. Don't go accusing me of things that you do. It's a great Freemason witch trade craft, and it doesn't work on me. So I will expose the truth if you really wanted me to, but I'm sure you really don't want what we have exposed. And please do not attack Tim. When I say we, I'm talking about Tim and I, because we are the only ones that hold the documents outside of the original authors, who I'm sure have their copies pretty well hidden on their computers or on a separate hard drive by now. So if you just happen to be strolling past, you wouldn't find it. But I'd be asking those questions quite seriously before you start accusing me or Tim of being divisive. That would be the pot calling the kettle black. I'll get it out eventually. Seems like this dickhead needs to go and stay off the road. Maybe have a drink. A nice scotch might warm me up. You never know. Folks, it's been a much longer show tonight because of my rant at the beginning and this little bit at the end. So I apologise for keeping you up later than normal. Great to see One Eye, better known as Eyeball, in the chat. The internet connection must be working all right. Oh, it must be working all right up in Ingham. I want to show you something very quickly.
Righto, here we are, Forest of the Fallen, Ingham. We just set it up along the side of the street here. A pretty good response. A lot of people seem to be awake to it now. Haven't had any negative stuff today.
Bloody good that you don't get any negative stuff. Thank you, mate, for doing that. And that was a few days ago now, or it might have been even at the end of last week. I apologise for not getting it up earlier, but you're in part of the live show tonight, so I thought I'd play it and say thank you. If you are doing any event like that, folks, if you've got a Forest of the Fallen, or if there is a local event that you'd like to showcase here, then do what One Eye did. He just Eyeball in the chat, but yeah, I call him Skipper Pete. That's how you know him. Grab your phone and send it to me. It's that simple. Do a little video. It doesn't have to be an hour long, just a minute, 30 seconds. That's a good one. 30 seconds was great. And a bit of a walkthrough of what you're doing. And I would love to see your Forest of the Fallen. If you are putting one up this weekend, please send it through to me. You can email it to carl@vofhq.com straight off your phone. It's that easy. So carl@vofhq.com, and I would love to show a few more of Forests of the Fallen that are happening around the country every week. And there is always not one, not two, but a bloody heap of them. And sadly, it's required. But the upside to all of that is that we are waking more people up every time that Forest of the Fallen gets erected. It opens conversations. Those conversations open minds. And with open minds, we will start winning the battle. As long as we're honest and open. Keep away from the dickheads, folks. Talk to you tomorrow night.
You let one ant stand up to us, then they all might stand up. Those puny little ants outnumber us 100 to 1. And if they ever figure that out, there goes our way of life. It's not about food. It's about keeping those ants in line. That's why we're going back. Does anybody else want to stay? Let's rock!